It's World Cup fever time on Last Call Games. While I admittedly said in my last video that I was going to review all the Dreamcast games, about one a week, this week we're going to go back to the original point of this channel, reviewing the last game for each system. Today's last game is for the Sony Playstation, FIFA Soccer 2005. The PlayStation came out of a broken agreement between Sony and Nintendo to produce an add-on for the SNES. Long story short, and it's a very long story, Sony worked with Nintendo. Nintendo suddenly announced that they were going to work with Philips. The add-on was cancelled. Philips made a lot of crappy games for the CDI that involved Nintendo characters. Sony takes the knowledge that they got from working on the add-on and turns it into the most popular video game system ever, until its successor, the PlayStation 2. Sony eventually sold over 100 million PlayStation 1s, and support for the system lasted over 10 years, from 1994, when it launched in Japan, to 2004, with this FIFA game that we'll be reviewing. While Sony's system may not have been the most powerful, they did release a system that was $100 cheaper at launch than its rival, the Sega Saturn, and was better equipped to handle 3D polygons than the Saturn. When the N64 launched, developers and publishers for the most part stayed away from Nintendo's expensive cartridge format, which could at most hold a tenth as much as the compact discs that the PS1 and Saturn used. The larger format allowed for more music, more videos, and bigger games. For comparison's sake, a combined total of 387 unique Nintendo 64 games were released worldwide, whereas the Saturn had 596 games. Not a terrible one, but that number includes a lot of Japan-only games. The PlayStation, on the other hand, had 7,918 games made for it. The system simply crushed the competition, which led to it having a far longer lifespan, with the last Saturn game being released in the US in 1998, and the last N64 game being released in 2001. This one came out 3 years after that. So now, for the purposes of this review, we're going to be comparing the US versions of FIFA 2005 for the PS1 and PS2 and seeing what's different about them. Now, the only other soccer game I have for the PS1 is World Cup 98, so I can't guarantee that FIFA 2005 is simply a roster update from earlier games. But I'm relatively certain it's simply a roster update from earlier games, as we'll see a lot in this series. That said, this game comes with 12 different leagues, all with licensed teams from 2004-2005 in them, as well as other licensed teams that are grouped into the rest of the world format from other leagues. It's a common thread through FIFA games. They license a bunch of leagues, and then a few leagues don't have. Then a few teams that aren't in the licensed league get licensed, and they're called the rest of the world. Now, there's also a bunch of international teams, both licensed and unlicensed. You can tell from whether or not there's a logo or a crest. For instance, the US is licensed, while Belgium, who sucks, is not. The game modes is where things get sparse. There's 4 modes. 1, Play Now, where you just play a game between 2 different teams. That's been in literally every sports game ever. Season mode, where you play as one season as any team in one of the 12 leagues. Tournament, where you play one of 4 tournaments: the EFA Trophy, and the European Champions Cup, which are the unlicensed versions of the UEFA Cup, which is now the Europa League, and the Champions League. The International Cup is a cup tournament for international teams, and the European Challenge is a tournament for European national teams. What's missing is the ability to put any team into any of the tournaments. So if you're a fan of, say, Chelsea or Manchester City, who aren't selectable for this edition of the European Champions Cup, you can't have one of those teams win that tournament. It's a bit of a bummer that you can't just play as any eligible team from one of the leagues. That brings us to the last mode, Custom Cup, which allows you to make a tournament with as many teams as you want from any leagues. It's nice, admittedly slow, and it's a kind of a pain to add 16 teams because you have to go cycle through each individual league and then cycle down to through all the teams. It could have been implemented better. And it would have been better just to be able to put any European team into the first two tournaments, as opposed to having to go through this way. Now, if you're wondering why I'm not mentioning any Asian, African, or American North or South tournaments, that's because, with the exception of Major League Soccer, all the other leagues are European. It strikes me as odd, as the typical audience for very, very late release games like these are developing countries. In places like Mexico or Brazil, they don't usually have as high of adoption rates as quickly as the major market countries do. And this PS2 version of this game has leagues for both Mexico and Brazil. The Mexican one is licensed, the Brazilian one, I think all the teams are licensed, but I don't think the league itself is actually licensed. Along with many, many more, almost twice as many leagues as the original PlayStation version. Including, you've got 4 levels of like the English league. You've got 4 levels: the Premier League, the Championship, League 1 and 2. In the PS1 version, it's all top division teams. Now, going on the presentation, well, it looks pretty much just like any other later FIFA game for the PS1. I literally looked at videos for 2002, 2003, and 2004, and they all look pretty much the same. The models are basically the same. The cameras all look similar. It's really just a roster update, I'm not gonna lie. The menu, especially when you're playing it on the PS3, is surprisingly slow and sluggish. The gameplay is similar to what you would expect from any modern FIFA game. And the gameplay is actually pretty good, with a helpful arrow pointing out which direction you'll pass towards, which I think is really something good. And the PS2 version doesn't have this, and I think it would be better if it did. But that's just me. And I must say that the radar on the PS1 looks better, as it's in a better place. On the PS2 version, it's on the bottom, which when you're on the near touchline, it completely impedes everything. And the radar on the PS2 version reminds me of a Magnavox Odyssey, for some reason. Nothing on the PlayStation should remind you of a Magnavox Odyssey whatsoever.
Yeah, he held on to that very well, John.
The audio is interesting. The commentary, which is also likely taken from earlier FIFA games, is solid for a PS1 game. It's there. There's a fair amount of it.
That's my favorite moment of the
You're definitely going to get a lot of repetition, and obviously not every single player is in the game. Players' names in the game, I should say. All the players that are in the game are in the game. But it gets the job done. One thing I've noticed, however, is that sometimes the announcer will only announce a player's name after he passes the ball to someone else. It's weird and a little off. The PS1 version also includes a lot of the music that was included in the 6th generation releases. Though, surprisingly, each song only has like a 30 or 40-second clip, usually just like the chorus. It's weird that they chose lossy, compressed clips, and you can tell that these are very highly compressed clips instead of fewer, fuller songs. Obviously, the PS2 version doesn't have this efficiency, given that the DVD of the game is on has a far larger capacity than a compact disc. Final thoughts. Surprisingly, I actually prefer the PS1 version to the 6th generation counterpart. While the graphics and sound are certainly better on the PlayStation 2, in 2014 neither one looks particularly great. More than a few PS2 games after this, and even before, really looked far superior to this game. But this is about as good looking as a 3D PlayStation 1 game's gonna get. There probably are better looking 3D PlayStation 1 games, but this is about as good as you're gonna get, just gonna say. The auto-aiming passing is very helpful, and for some reason all the preset tournaments from the PlayStation 1 version aren't in the PS2 version. It's strange. The PS2 version has a ton of in-country cups and tournaments and stuff, but it doesn't seem to have any of these Europe-wide ones. I'm not sure why. I mean, obviously you can still make them. You can still actually manually make the Champions League, and you can make the Champions League with any team you want. So if you want to take Hull City into the Champions League, go for it. The far larger career mode from the PS2 version is definitely better than the single season allotted of the PS1 game. Especially given that the PS2 game has more leagues, so you can actually get promoted or relegated, depending on which country you're in. You can't do that in one season of Top Flight Soccer. The PS2 version is seemingly more difficult to score in, as it took me 3.5 games, not the ones that are recorded here, but 2 at semi-pro, and the rest at amateur, aka Germany versus Brazil, just to score 1 goal. In the PS1 version, it's not uncommon to see 3 or 4 goals in a game with 5-minute halves. Also of note is the larger creation, customization, and online functionalities present in the PS2 version. While the online servers have been shut down for probably years now, there might still be people playing FIFA 2005 on private servers. I'm not aware of any, but I wouldn't be surprised. What's disconcerting, however, is that almost all the third kits in the game, the third jerseys, have to be bought with points earned in the game. In the PS1 version, it doesn't have that. I don't think I've ever seen another sports game that makes you buy, with fake money or otherwise, contemporary jerseys. Past ones, yes, but this game has no retro or throwback game jerseys. Luckily, this is a thing that didn't catch on permanently, because that would have been very, very awkward. The PS1 version's customization options basically allow you to set the lineups for each team. The PS2 version allows you to create a player, which gives you serviceable customization, though it's not as in-depth as the game face that EA later on introduced with Tiger Woods 2005, but it'll do. In total, the PlayStation version of FIFA 2005 gets a last call score of a 7 out of 10. Good, but not great. If you're looking for a soccer game, it's one of the better ones you'll find. In contrast, the PS2 version gets a 5 out of 10. The implements it makes compared to the PS1 game are for the most part detrimental. That's all, folks, and we'll see you on the next episode of Last Call Games, which will be next week. We're going to go on to the Dreamcast, reviewing Roadsters, a racing game for the system.